Good morning. I'll just be honest with you, that was mighty weak. That was mighty weak. Any rate, uh, as you all know, David and family are in Memphis. He's speaking on the Memphis lectures this week. I believe he's on in the tomorrow morning to be his lesson. And so I'll be filling in for him this morning. And if we have services later, James Brown is going to be leading that. We'll be leaving out for New Mexico shortly after services. Okay? Sick and prayer list. Of course, let's remember Heather. She keeps going to MD Anderson for, she's on a special program, and they need to make sure that she's in compliance with that. Melina Presley, home and doing very well according to Dottie. Bill Mears, of course, we want to remember Bill. Jackie Adcox. Aaron Shuey, which is Diane Gale and Lorraine's nephew. He just lost his dad since first of the year. Lost his middle son, who played baseball, just all of a sudden died. And he's been diagnosed with shingles in his mouth. And so he's really struggling. Mike Parker, Mike's going to be having surgery coming up here next month. I believe that's right. And so, of course, Rose Carlisle, Charles and Brenda Massey, Jimmy Tomlin, Cecil Ledbetter. Remember all of these in our prayer. Anyone else that we didn't announce that we needed to? Okay. Is that right? Yeah, Brad, Brad's one of Brad's daughters. Phil, that's right, not Brad. Caroline, there you go. Did the elders know that? Carolyn Hatcher's in Mobile Infirmary. Okay. Is she in a room, Dale? Okay. I got the report from Dale. She'd sent to him. Going to be there. They're running several tests and trying to figure out, what's going on. All right. If you will, bow with me, we'll go to God in prayer. Yes. Yes. Now, who? Oh, yeah, okay. Right. Okay.
Going up there for 40 years, of course, they've been going up there a lot longer than I have. It's a quaint little town, but they were getting hard, so it's growing, unfortunately, they all got back to us.
Okay. Well, and I understand that there's some weather going to be showing up here later today. Don't know any of the details about that, but with the same system?
Same system.
Is that right? These storms can be powerful, I tell you.
Estimated between 166 and 200 miles per hour. Just stay on the ground.
Last I heard, 23 dead, 4 missing,
26, it's 26 now.
26 now.
The two they lost in Amory were a father, or his child, or wasn't expecting his wife to live through either, so, and there no update on that. That was the last before we got to that part.
You know, that reminds me of something while we're talking about it. Some people believe that these storms, whether it be tornadoes, hurricanes, and snow, ice, and whatever, that this is God punishing his people. And if you think about the logic of that for just a moment, are we saying all the wicked people live in that one little area? That would be what you'd have to be saying, to hold to that. We understand that there are a number of things that affect our weather, but I'd be very careful not to put it at the feet of God, that this is his way of punishing people. I know that when the earthquake hit Oakland was during the World Series, it had to be postponed. You know, the big lines in the newspaper headlines was that here's God punishing, the wicked. And I've often thought about that, and I thought, it's pretty remarkable if you're going to get all the wicked people in that one little area, and yet that would be the logical implication of it. But certainly we will be mindful and we will pray for these folks. Did I hear you say 26 dead? Wow.
And it started in Rolling Forks, Mississippi, and went through Super Creek.
Northern Mississippi and North Alabama, in the Muscle Shoals area. Of course, they're famous for that, aren't they? Up there.
In Alabama, so
One dead in Alabama, 25. Okay. Anything else we need to be mindful of? Dale's brother, Earl, cancer has come back and he's receiving treatments. And while he was up there, his, is it your niece? Okay. And it was Earl's brother, your brother Earl's wife, Gail, she had needs.
On Thursday before I got there, Friday she had surgery. She's been released to drive already. It's only been 3 weeks.
Can you believe that? She's been walking around and driving and whatever. That is amazing. Okay, let's go to God in prayer on behalf of these folks. Holy and righteous Father, we do thank thee for every blessing of life, especially for the great love that thou hast displayed for us in sending Christ to die in our stead, and that through his sacrifice we can be redeemed. We are grateful and mindful, our Father, of thy healing hands, and we pray for thy richest blessings upon all those that we've mentioned that are sick, that are in the hospital, those that have experienced these storms as it's gone through Mississippi and Alabama, the tornado, especially in Amory, Mississippi, that thou would be with them and would bless them and help them at times like this, that they can find courage and hope and comfort in thee. We thank thee, dear Lord, for every good blessing that thou hast sent our way, and may we always be mindful that thou hast loved us and will continue to do so, even in spite of the way that we live sometimes. Watch over us, dear Lord. Forgive us. Keep us ever close to thee. We ask it all in the name of Christ. Amen. All right. We're going to begin with Job 1. I thought I would use the overhead or the projector, but we don't have Wi-Fi, and my system requires Wi-Fi connection, so it won't be seen up here, but we'll cover the same material. And I'd like to introduce the idea that in Job chapters 1 and 2 is what we call the prologue, or the introduction, setting and the scene in the book of Job. You know that the most part, beginning with chapter 2 and about verse 11, I believe it is, going through the main section, chapters 26, is a cycle of 3 speeches from Job's 3 friends. Eliphaz seemed to be the oldest. He went first. Bildad was the next older, and he would go second. And then Zophar was the youngest, and he would go last. And this would be the cycle of speeches in which each of them gave. Now, you would think that they were contemporaries with today, because these 3 friends came from afar. They came and they sat down with Job, and they sat there for 7 days. They didn't say anything. We'll have a little more to say about that in our next hour. But they sat there for 7 days and said nothing. But when they did speak, all 3 of them concluded that, Job, you are suffering because you've sinned. Now, let's evaluate that philosophy for just a moment, because that's going to be at the heart and core of what we're going to be talking about. Yes, we suffer because of sin. Not necessarily our sin. We may be in a car accident. We may be driving according to the law, legitimate and everything, and somebody hit us. That's not a fault of ours. We may suffer at the hands of others. People make mistakes. They were showing, and you've seen all kinds of things on TV, but they were showing that several people were dressed in white shirts and white slacks, and was going through a crowd, and then all of a sudden one broke off, and he shot some people up in New York, I believe it was. You know, what did that person, the likelihood is he didn't even know that person, and yet there was suffering as a result. So, yes, we suffer because of sin, but that's not the only idea. It's not the only result of it. Sometimes we suffer because someone else has sinned beyond us and our immediate. Yet, the Apostle Paul expressed it this way when he says that in 1 Corinthians, he says that we suffer for the consequences of sin. Sin has its consequences. And we will suffer many times as a result of the consequence, the choices that we make in various things. So Job's 3 friends thought they were going to really express a bit of wisdom and knowledge and really enlighten Job as to what's going on in his life. And all they could come up with is, Job, you're suffering because you've sinned, because they reasoned that all sin results in suffering. Well, Job didn't buy that. And in the cycle of speeches, Job maintained his innocence. So let's look at the book of Job and see what we can learn about it. Let's look at the first 5 verses. There was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job. And the man was perfect and upright, and one that feared God and eschewed or hated evil. And there were born unto him 7 sons and 3 daughters. His substance also was 7,000 sheep and 3,000 camels and 500 yoke of oxen, or a total of 1,000 oxen. and 500 she asses, and a very great household, so that this man was the greatest of all the men of the East. And his sons went and feasted in their houses, every one his day, and sent and called for their 3 sisters to eat and to drink with them. And it was so, when the days of the feasting were gone about, that Job sent and sacrificed them, and rose up early in the morning, and offered burnt offerings according to the number of them all. For Job said, "It may be that my sons have sinned and cursed God in their hearts." Thus did Job continually. Now, one of the things that's just a casual reading here, we don't know, and I'll say more about the land of Uz in just a moment, but if you'll notice the very last part of verse 5 here, Job had offered sacrifices for his children. This would have placed Job, that Job would have lived somewhere after the time of Abraham in Genesis 10, 11, and 12. That's where we put Job in as when he actually lived. Now, David has done a great job introducing the book. No doubt Job probably wrote the book and a number of other things. But let's look at some of the things that we learn in the case of Job. First of all, we see that he was, I'm not trying to pound on this to make noise, but when I tap it, it's vibrating through. Okay. Job was from the land of Uz. Anyone know where the land of Uz was located? Pardon? I didn't anticipate any hands showing. The scholars are really varied about this. Some have it, the land that was east of Edom, down in the south. Damascus, was up in the north, and some have it up in that area, and all through that region. The best that I was able to come up with is if you were to draw an oval from Edom over into Arabia, somewhere in that location was the land of Uz. We're not told precisely. And I suspect the reason that we don't know is that somebody would go over there and erect some kind of a monument, and they'd want to worship because it was famous of this land. We just don't know where it was. But he was, and it's interesting because you notice that the Bible said here that in verse number 3, that Job was greatest of all of the men of the East. And that was generally the area that we've talked about. So beyond that, we cannot pinpoint exactly where the land of Uz was. The Bible goes on to say that there were born unto him 7 sons and 3 daughters, making a total of 10 children, okay? And he was a very wealthy man. Notice what it says. His substance also was 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 she-asses, and a very great household. By every measurement, Job was a very wealthy man. Now, where he got all of this, whether he worked for it, whether he inherited this, the Bible doesn't tell us, okay? But does it really matter whether he inherited it or whether he worked for it? If it was in his possession, he was to take care of it. And so here he was, a very wealthy, a very considered man, one that was perfect and upright. Now, if you talk to some folks along the evolutionary chain, they say, see, that's where man came from a monkey, because there was a time when he began to walk upright. That has not the first clue about what that verse is talking about. The idea of perfect is the idea of maturity. James uses that throughout his book exclusively, that the perfect man, he's a mature man, one that has the ability to think, to reason, and to choose in a very valid way. So he was perfect in the sense, not sinlessly, no one was that except our Lord, but he was perfect in the sense that he was a mature man. And upright just simply meant the fact that he was honest, and that in his business deals, whatever they were, that he always represented that which was right and good, and wasn't trying to get ahead by taking advantage of someone else. That was the character of Job. His wife and 7 sons and 3 daughters. Job's wife sometimes doesn't get a fair shake from the book of Job, because you remember in chapter 2, she says, Job, she says, man, you're suffering so bad, and it's hard, it's pitiful on you, but it's no cake for me either. And she says, why don't you curse God and die? Put yourself out of this misery. If that's all we had, then we probably would think that she was a pretty evil woman, and she didn't think about Job very well and didn't want the best for him. But that's not the case. There's not a great deal said after this. When the Sabaeans come and give report that your 7 children are dead, nothing is said about the wife. She wasn't killed with them. So she continued to live on with Job. No doubt they worked through their struggles, trials, whatever the couples go through. And so it's probably a little different picture than what we might normally paint of his wife. Cursed God and died. She's probably going to be remembered more for that than maybe for all of the good, maybe for the comfort and things that she brought to Job. 7 sons. Why the number 7? You find that interesting? Okay.
Maybe not in this instance, but that's what.
Yes. Normally, the number 7 represents completeness, fullness. Okay? And it very well could refer to that. We're not told why he had 7 sons, 3 daughters, but the fact that he did. Okay? And these were good children, and as far as everything that we know about them. When you read these verses 1 through 5 very carefully, there's some things that are said in there. And his sons went and feasted in the houses. Was it wrong to have feast days? In fact, no, some of them were commanded that they were to keep. So we can't read into this that this feasting was exuberant or was beyond what God would allow. It seems to be very well within that time framework, okay? And they feasted in their houses, everyone on his day, and they were mindful of the three sisters, because what did they ask them to do? They said, come and join us, okay? They would make the provisions, okay? Very honorable, no doubt, as well. But as far as we know, these were good children, were obedient children, and it wasn't the fact that they lost their lives is not indicative or is not reflective that they were evil in some kind of way. Bible doesn't say anything other than what it says here. Okay? Just the fact that they were, and Job was the kind of a man, as a patriarch, that he made sure that he made offering for those children in the feast, whatever it was. Whatever had to be sacrificed, that's what he did. And he did for them as well, which indicates that Job would have been very much in the part of this, what we call patriarchy. Three distinct religions: patriarchy, Mosaic, and Christianity. We're now living under the days of Christianity. But prior to that, Mosaic, that is, it came about through the law of Moses. And patriarchy, which was from the very beginning up until the time that God gave Moses that law. Three distinct, separate religions. God required different things. Today, under Christianity, we don't worship the same day that they did under the law of Moses. What day was that? The Sabbath. Now, someone says, well, what day was the Sabbath day? If you look on a calendar, we start with Sunday, and you count through 7, and you get to Saturday. Saturday was always the 7th day. That was the Sabbath day. And then the first day of the week, Sunday. That's the day that our Lord arose from the grave. Everything in the New Testament is built around that concept. So you see, there were three distinct religions, and each one had its own distinct features. So when you think about Job, think about going all the way back to the time of patriarchy, and you're going to be in the right context as far as interpreting what is involved. Now, Job was even blessed beyond that, because the Bible says that his substance was 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, and 500 she-asses. He had a pretty good sized livestock. Think about that. I grew up on my uncle's farm. We milked 40 head of cattle. We milked them twice a day, and the milk truck had to run every day because by time we did the next milking, that milk tank, great big old milk tank we had out there, would be full. So can you imagine that just from 40 cows? Can you think about 7,000 sheep, camels, and oxen and such? So he was very, very well-to-do. Thousands of these. And yet, Steve, how important is it to feed those animals every day? Feed the animals every day.
We let them range, but you still have to take care of them.
That's right. You have to provide sometimes feed for them. And I don't know how much land Job owned, do you? We don't know if it was all of the land of Uz. It could have been. It may not have been. But the whole fact is that by having all of this livestock seems to indicate to me that Job was an intelligent man. And he knew how to take care of all of these animals and to see to it that they were fed sufficient water, nutrients, and various things. So he had quite a large livestock in him, so that he was one of the greatest men of all the East. Now, when we think about that land over there today, Arabia, that would be modern-day Saudi Arabia. Okay, and we think of in and around Palestine, that southern part of Palestine, land of Bashan. You go back in early Bible times in the book of Genesis, and it describes this land as very fertile soil. And you put water to it, and you could grow most anything. And so very interesting that all of this seems to just fit into piece and show us somewhat where this land was. But Job was every much a man of great possessions, and also the fact that he had a great household. I don't know if you've ever thought about this or not, but prior to the Genesis flood, do you know how long people lived? It all depends. Depends on what? Calculator you have? If you were to think about it, you can start with Adam and Eve and go all the way up to the time that God sent the flood. If you add all of those numbers up and divide it by the number, you're going to come up with something about 914 years. That's the average life. Now, who was the oldest man? Methuselah. How long did he live? 969, okay? And he probably, if we can go back in time and in exact increments, he probably died the same year of the flood. Probably not in the flood, but died that same year of the flood. But think about this, 900 plus years. Women could start having children at about the age of 100. How old was Sarah? Okay. And do you think that the average size of a family during this time, when there were several hundred years that women could have children, that they had 2.3 children? No, don't think that's it. No, I don't think that's accurate either. It very well may be, now fasten your seatbelts on this one. It very well may be that as many people perished in the flood as are living on the face of the earth today. Now, you say, well, that's a far stretch. Look at how long those women could have children. They could have children for 600-700 years. Is it any reason to think 3 daughters and 7 sons? Some didn't. What about Jacob? How many children did Jacob have? Are you sure? He had 12 sons, but he had daughters as well. Yeah. Why? Why this number? You see, it's not far-fetched to really think about that. May it be interesting, may not be, but I'll tell you what. When you read about Job and you put it in this time frame, it's astronomical, the man and the character that he had. So they were feasting. He called for the sisters, and they came. And so when the days of the feasting were gone about, that Job sent and sanctified them. I think I said sacrifice. I meant sanctified them. That is, set them apart. And rose up early in the morning. And what was his characteristic? He offered burnt offerings according to the number of them all. For the 7 sons, but also for the 3 daughters. Okay? That it may be that my children have sinned. Sacrifice was for what? To cover the sin that was committed. So Job was not only righteous, upright, perfect, as we talked about, mature, but he reasoned and he understood that, listen, children are children. okay? Some children are going to do just that. They're going to be children. They're going to act up. They're going to make mistakes. We don't expect them to be perfect, do we? If we did, they wouldn't have us as parents because we're not perfect. And so, Job reasoned to himself. He says, peradventure that my children have sinned, he said, I'm going to make sacrifice for them. He wasn't going to leave it to chance. They're pretty good, boys and girls, and we'll let it go with that. No, he sacrificed for them, okay? And when he rose up and he offered burnt offerings according to the number of all, for Job said, it may be that my sons have sinned and cursed God in their hearts. Thus did Job continually. Why didn't it say that it was possible for the daughters to sin? Did I overlook something? Verse number 5 says that my sons. Is it impossible for women to sin? Surely we wouldn't. Is there any married man in here that would make that statement? Is there any in here looking for a wife that would make that statement? No. We understand that all are capable of sinning. And they did too. Here's what we have to understand. From the beginning of the Bible all the way through to the end. The Bible has always addressed the male, particularly in these roles, because who was to fill the role of leadership? It was always the man's responsibility. It wasn't that he wasn't mindful of ladies or didn't care about the ladies, but the fact is that it was the men that were to take care of those things. So Job is emphasizing that very thing, that it may be that they have sinned in their hearts. And he said these things need to be taken care of. So thus did Job continually. When we do something after a long period of time, it may become more habit to us than having to give a great thought. I don't particularly, some of my shoes don't have shoestrings, but I don't have to sit down and leave myself a note that when I get up in the morning, make sure you put on your socks and then put on your shoes. And if you got laces in your shoes, make sure that you lace them up, you tie them. Do you have to do that? Where's Mike Parker when you want to pick on him? Now, we do it because we've done it. We've ingrained ourselves, trained ourselves just that way. Job did not find it a burden or something. God, I just did that. Do I have to do that again and again and again? And however long it was that Job lived, if he lived during those patriarchs, he would have lived up there in years. But Job did it continually. All the while he was the father, while he was on this earth, he operated that way. So you know what that tells me? That tells me, friends, it just doesn't matter. There's never going to come a time when we can throw in the towel and say, God, I quit. There's never be that time. There's always going to be a God that we're to live for, that we're to serve, that we're going to worship, that we're going to honor both in our life and in our heart with the speech that we use and things. And Job recognized that very fact. He did it continually. There wasn't a stopping point until Job was no longer in this earth. Isn't that interesting? Just some casual things that you find it in the account, but they're there for a reason. And we've got just a few more minutes. Any questions or comments over these first 5 verses?
Verse 5, that it may be that my sons have You pray broadly.
He could not specify that they did this or this or that.
That's right.
But was Job a man as well? Well, the Bible says that he was. There was a man in the land. And so Job knew what it was to sin, and he knew temptations, and he knew what was before his children. And so, it was a safe assumption that they're going to do wrong from time to time. But Job wasn't going to rely upon chance. Now, the whole point of that is this. How many times do people today say, well, I can justify not doing this one time, or I can justify not doing that. I try to live my life. I try to be a pretty good fella. Job wasn't of that mindset, okay? And I'm persuaded that we should not be of that mindset either. Thinking that, all the things that I've done in the past, why surely that's going to be enough, and God's going to accept that. Friends, God doesn't have to accept anything, because we have nothing to offer to equal the sacrifice he's made for us. And that was true whatever age it was, but particularly true in the patriarchal age. Okay, well, they're lined up waiting to get in. Any questions or comments? I'll let David know to pick up with verse number 6 next week. Thank you for your good